The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we talked Alexander Ovechkin on our last podcast, and anything that could go wrong in his chase to pass Wayne Gretzky. It's only right that we talk about, what could happen when things go right. You've been all over what the NHL could be doing to celebrate Alexander Ovechkin's chase. What are you hearing right now?
Well, look, it's getting real, right? Because even as we're recording this, he's still 8 goals from breaking the record. I think everyone's aware he could have a hat trick in Thursday's game against the Flyers and 2 more goals on the weekend. And then all of a sudden we get into next week and the moment is almost upon us. And so, there's been a lot of discussion at the league level about this. It sounds like 15 NHL officials, essentially people that work for the league, will be traveling to each game once it gets closer. We know Wayne Gretzky will be there once Ovechkin's within 4 of breaking the record. And so, it's starting to feel real, the great chase, I'd say, because, we could have a scenario where those people are starting to attend games, potentially in the next few days. It would take a big weekend explosion, but I don't think anyone would put it past Ovechkin at this time. And there's been a lot of debate, Julian, like, what do you do? Like, the moment is, this is considered by the NHL, maybe its most sort of sacred, hallowed record. Arguably, I mean, scoring goals, of course, is the fundamental part of the game. And this is a record that Wayne Gretzky's held since 1994. And I think until probably the last year or two, there was reason to doubt whether anyone would ever break it. But Ovechkin's, managed to continue on and scoring at a pretty crazy rate for someone his age. And so, we're at the last weeks of the season here, right? And I'll just look at some of these games. Like, you get into April, I'm sure they're going to have a game against someone in a playoff spot. I don't have this committed
you got
to memory
Carolina.
Yet. The Islanders and the Blue Jackets are 2 teams that are fighting for a spot. Like, let's say he scores a goal 3 minutes left in the third period of a game. He ties a game up. There's actually going to be a ceremony and like in real time. I mean, I think there should be this again. There's a pretty special moment, a special goal, but they're going to limit it to 7 minutes. But there will be a delay in whatever game when Ovechkin ultimately reaches this. And again, it could be a big moment of a pretty big game, at least for one of the other teams. I mean, the Capitals have their playoff positioning already pretty much sewn up, so it's not going to affect them to the same degree. So these are the kind of discussions and planning scenarios that are already going on.
So we were talking about this briefly off air, and you mentioned that 7-minute delay, and I didn't really get to finish my point on why I think 7 minutes is a bit weird. You're absolutely right. Like, if it's in the middle of these games where things could matter, and 7 minutes is a long time. But if you're celebrating Alexander Ovechkin, doesn't 8 minutes make more sense than 7? 7, like, for number 8. But also, yes, to be serious here, like, you have to limit these things for those types of situations. Like, you can't have it go on forever. You can't have, like, a 30-minute ceremony.
Right. And do you know what the other scenario that's in play is? When Hank Aaron broke the baseball all-time home runs record, he tied the record in a game in Cincinnati, and he was playing for Atlanta at the time. And then he actually sat out a couple road games before the team went home, and then he ultimately broke the record at home. Now, I'm not saying the Capitals are going to do this, but in the event, let's say he ties it, and then the next game is a road game. If the Capitals are going to sit Ovechkin out, the league has said, you got to tell us, you got to give us fair warning because they don't need the traveling circus to travel to a game where potentially they're holding him out just to give him a chance to do it at home. Now, as I say, I don't know that they're going to, that they're necessarily going to want to play with that kind of fire. I mean, imagine you sit him out a game trying to make it perfect and he doesn't, get there at all this season. But, again, these are the sort of conversations that are happening because I think they really do want to do the moment right. And, even if there is a review, it doesn't mean it's going to spoil the moment. It might even make it more dramatic in a sense. You just hope it's not some ticky-tacky thing that takes a goal off the board that we're all talking about and screaming about on Twitter. But when he ties a record, there won't be a ceremony. They'll let the Capitals players come on the ice and celebrate with him. So there'll obviously be a bit more of a break in the game than normal after a goal. But then when he breaks that record, he scores number 895. It's going to be quite a thing. the Blue Jackets might be in a big game against Ovechkin at that point in time, for example, and have to face a long delay there.
Home and home, by the way, on the weekend of April 12th, 13, Capitals and Blue Jackets. The Jackets host the game on the Saturday, and then it goes to DC on the 13th. Yeah, I obviously with this goal chase, you mentioned the idea of a review. I started wondering if there's like a weird deflection and we're wondering like, oh, is this goal actually Ovechkin's or is this goal actually Tom Wilson's? Right. Like stuff like that obviously is stuff that we're going to have to think about leading into it. Also, from your notebook with Michael Russo, it looks like Wayne Gretzky is going to be part of that traveling circus, I believe within 4 goals of the record, if I have that right.
Yeah. And look, that's what Gordie Howe did for him when he broke the record. In his day, Gordie Howe was there to be there in person and shake his hand and be part of the ceremony. Obviously, speak to reporters. I would expect Gretzky will do the same to mark the moment. I mean, he's already been pretty gracious. If you've seen any of the times he's discussed Ovechkin in the last year or so about like wanting to see him break this, about it being an inevitability. So I don't think there's any real mixed emotions for him. I mean, Gretzky still has so many records. I couldn't even tell you how many. It's a crazy amount. I mean, I'm not sure anyone really is going to get to his all-time points record. I mean, getting within 800 of it would be something. Maybe that's something that Connor McDavid might do. But it's going to be a pretty cool thing. And I think the league just wants to get it done right. I mean, that's why they're having these kind of meetings and trying to set the stage for whatever's going to happen here. And look, there's already some debate. Will he get it done before the end of the season? Because he's slowed down here maybe the last couple of games. I did speak to Barry Trotz, coached him in Washington for 4 years for a story I'm working on at The Athletic. And Barry said he's going to have 100 shots between now and the end of the season. He said there is no way in his mind when Ovechkin gets sort of locked in on or focused on something that he's not going to find a way to get it done. So at least someone who's been behind the scenes in the trenches with Ovechkin is willing to say publicly that he thinks there's no way he's missing this season.
Yeah, Flyers tonight for the Washington Capitals. Then you got the Panthers on the weekend. Then next week you play against the Jets and Minnesota. Then you get Buffalo the weekend after. There's some opportunity. Look, Alexander Ovechkin, he's well on his way to the record. It might not really matter who he goes up against, but there's some opportunities for him to at least get back on the right track with that when it comes to that goal scoring record. I think he's doing it before the end of the year. I'm not on the side that says he needs more time going into next season. He's doing this by early April. It's happening. We don't have to worry about this.
I'm still kind of for the drama of it. I'd love to see him go into that last game of the season in Pittsburgh with a chance to break it, or even maybe if he's one back. Like I think that would be pretty spectacular. Just the whole bookends with him and Crosby. But I'm with you. I think he gets it done sooner than that. But if it ends up going down to the last game of the season and there's still a chance and it's not broken, I mean, we'll all be watching that game. I guarantee it.
Absolutely. We got to go in on the GM's meetings in Florida and also one Gary Bettman speaking at those meetings yesterday. A lot discussed. I kind of want to start with the future of the All-Star game next year. We did kind of touch on it on our last episode, but it seems as if the NHL is acknowledging the fact that there is a bit of an interesting situation with that game, which is supposed to be in Long Island next year.
Yeah, pretty fascinating to me to hear Gary Bettman say publicly that, basically they're looking at all options to change that event, that they understand they can't just come back with the same sort of what I will call a tired format that they've had over a number of years with the skills competition, the 3-on-3, tournament between the divisions. And they're looking at doing something else. And that really it's in direct relation or because of what they saw at the Four Nations face-off, that in Gary Bettman's words, raised the bar for them, was such a successful tournament. It's not to say there's going to be another Four Nations face-off next year in February, but I think that they know that they're going to get panned if they just come back with a tired All-Star game after that. And so, it's a weird set of situations because they announced the Islanders hosting the All-Star game back in February 2024, awarded it to UBS Arena, one of the new arenas, in the league. And, the Islanders have communicated this to their fans. It's, presumably part of the second season package renewals that have gone out is contemplating, paying for, an All-Star weekend. And so, it's kind of a complicated thing to unwind. I would say you can't. It's not just a matter. You can't just be like, we're canceling it, because I think that there's probably some contractual or other reasons you can't just do that. The other thing they have going here, Julian, is we have the Olympics next year, and all the NHL players that will be traveling to the Olympics will be flying into New York, where they take charter flights to Italy. And so you're going to have the top players in the league all coming to New York at that time anyway. And so I really don't know what it's going to look like. I think that there's some debate. Do we still do something like a skills competition? Or is there just no on-ice component and they come up with something brand new? I mean, I think that that's kind of where the discussions have been at. But, I would say for this, I'm not the biggest fan of all-star games. I think the league has got to the right place on this. I mean, I think that they're thinking about it the right way, there's maybe ways to bring all your best players together and do something cool, but doing what they've done, in the past, it's been almost every year. I don't think is the answer. And so, they're looking at the broader climate too, right? Like the NBA, while the NHL's Four Nations face-off was going on, the NBA had an all-star weekend in which like players in real time that were at the weekend were criticizing it. Obviously fans in the media had a lot to say about that. Like all-star games in general, I think are just kind of hit their expiry date. I think all leagues are looking at what to do. It's my understanding the NBA is looking at like doing something new next year because they can't just roll back with what they've done. And so, this is part of it's in relation to the Four Nations face-up, but it's also the broader sort of sporting climate. It's just, these games are passé. So I think the league is in a good mind frame with where to do it. And look, they've said they got to get this done by the playoffs. So at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to have to make a final decision and presumably communicate that to us and let us know what they're going to do instead.
I'm just trying to picture if you have all of those potential all-stars in New York and you have them doing some kind of like skills competition. It doesn't have to be on the ice or anything, but just like, I'm not really sure what you can do to really like satiate our appetites that isn't something Four Nations-esque. Like there's no way they would get to be like, all right, guys, we're just going to put you guys together with these international teams and then we're going to send you to the Olympics. Like that's not going to fly, right?
No. And look, I'm somewhat sympathetic here. Like they did announce this well ahead of time before they knew what the Four Nations would be. Yeah. And the Four Nations, you can't recreate that Four Nation. Like a lot of things came together to make that tournament what it was, and the way it captured attention and interest was very unique. I mean, let's face it, even some of the political climate, like things the NHL couldn't plan for or have anything to do with, I think added to the whole event. Obviously the players were bought in, which I think was probably the number one factor in making that successful. The guys cared, they played hard. They made it a show. They were the show, right? So, I just don't think you can replicate that in a fake tournament or fake whatever you do right before they go to the Olympics, where presumably they're going to try to replicate that, except they're going to be doing it on an even grander stage than the Four Nations face-off because they'll be on the Olympic stage. So, I think the league's in a tough spot with this, but I am happy to hear that it sounds like there's no chance they're going to do exactly what they've done in the past. To me, that is the right way to go, even if it's a little awkward and you got to work things out with the Islanders. And obviously you'll have to figure out whatever, I'm not sure what fans have paid money for or whatever, but like it's still, it's the right decision, even if it's a very complicated process, because I just think knowingly going into it that it's going to be ripped, it's going to be such a letdown after what we've had as a mid-season event this season. They're going to get to the right place. I just think it's almost a no-win situation.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Mando. You ever lift a little too hard, or you just forget to apply your daily deodorant and you get hit by a whiff of BO? Does that 3-in-1 shampoo leave you needing a second shower after having your first? It happens. But let me tell you about this product. From the founders of Lumi, Mando Whole Body Deodorant is helping men conquer their odor in a new way. Formulated with mandelic acid, Mando has long-lasting 72-hour odor control that actually stops odor before it starts. The best part is you can put Mando anywhere. Pits, packages, feet, skin folds, back, knees, everywhere. To top it off, Mando's cologne quality scents were created with men in mind. Just going to put you a heads up here. the bourbon leather, absolute game changer. Really good. Use it before I get my day started every day. Absolutely amazing. That's the one I got to recommend to you guys. Once you experience fresher underarms, a fresher package, and fresher feet, you will never go back. Special offer for new customers, $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code Johnston. You have the link here, shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. Why can't the NHL give the Islanders the draft? And this could also be a good segue into a discussion about the decentralized draft. But like, if you're worried about the season ticket holders and what they paid for, if you just move that opportunity to, hey, in June, the UBS Arena will host the draft. And instead of doing what we did in 2025, which was a terrible idea because teams just want to save money for whatever reason, and just you have it in LA and just have just a limited number of prospects there, we're bringing it back the old way and we're doing it at the UBS Arena.
I mean, they could do that. Maybe they'll do that also with what they're planning for February. I mean, I think the fact that all the top players in the league will be flying to basically, all gather in one place before they go on charter flights to the Olympics. I think that they want to take advantage of that opportunity too. I mean, it's a unique opportunity to have in the middle of the season literally all your best players in one city, and especially a city like New York where there's a lot of opportunities to do cool things, right? So, and that just so happens that's where they'd already promised the All-Star game to go to. So I do think it's mainly they're still locked on doing something in that window, mostly just because the players will be there. I think that's the number one driving force. As for the draft, it's pretty interesting, right? Like, we're a few months out here from the first ever decentralized draft, they're calling it, at the Peacock Theater in LA. They're going to invite the top 50 prospects to come. So you'll basically just have players expected to go in the first round for the most part will be the only ones in attendance. You'll have at least one representative from each team, but it's not going to be like the GM. It's going to be someone the team trusts to sort of be their representative on the ground, of course. But there's going to be a heavy virtual component. So literally when a player gets drafted, Julian, in this, they're going to walk through into something they're calling like the hockey house, but it's like walking into a room and they're going to bring you the entire staff. So somehow, like, it'll be like, whatever, the Columbus Blue Jackets just drafted. It's like, I'm Don Waddell. Good to meet you. And everyone from their front office or the coaching staff, what have you. I mean, I think it's going to be kind of cool. They're also going to have celebrities or notable people make all the picks. I think Gary Bettman will probably make the first overall pick on behalf of the team. But then I think each subsequent team is going to, like we had Celine Dion, make a pick for the Montreal Canadiens last year. Michael Buffer made one for Philadelphia. But I think every team is going to have someone like that do it. I mean, it's going to be interesting, but I'm saying all this and giving you the download of what it's going to look and feel like. But before we've even had it, it sounds like a lot of teams are already having second thoughts about doing it this way. And a lot of teams are already wanting to go back to the old draft, which is kind of funny, right? Like, they did a vote of all teams on this last year when they started this initiative. It was 26-6 in favor of doing the draft in a decentralized, moving to this new model of draft. And again, before we've even seen what it looks like, a lot of teams want to go back to the old way. So, I think that no decisions are going to be reached until after June, until we see what happens in LA. But I'm mentally preparing for this to be the only decentralized draft, and then we're just going to go back to having everyone in the same place. Because, I think the way the NHL does it, honestly, is pretty unique. It's a draft unlike the other sports. I think it's, for those of us that have been going to it for years, like, it's a really fun event. It's a unique event. It's something that the NHL does different, I think, and I think they should celebrate that. So we'll have to see where it winds up, but I'm predicting a 2026 draft will be somewhere where we're all back together again.
Yeah, I think teams were reconsidering this even as far back as when this was announced, I think around the time before last year's draft. Like, teams flying down and being able to see the prospects for themselves and just being in that atmosphere and getting to meet with other GMs and taking that all in. Like, I think that was a bit underestimated in some of all of this. So I would not be surprised, just like you, to see this revert back to what we normally expect for 2026 and beyond. Like, I just think the idea of it, like, copying, like, what the NBA does something similar with this too. Like, I didn't like the idea of it being decentralized. Like, I mean, I just think it's just a weird idea, but we'll see how it plays out for next year and
get this,
and all that.
Some teams thought this would save them money, right? Because there's obviously expenses. Like teams fly in like up to 30, 40, 50 staff members. It's, your staff, it's your scouts. It's obviously your whole front office. Some teams bring their coaches. The point is there is an expense to it, and they thought it would be cheaper, but then they just realized, hey, wait, now we just got to fly all those people into our own city. But, the scouts for any given team don't live in the city by and part that they work for, right? Because they're scattered around the globe, some in Europe, blah, blah, blah. So there's still the expense of flying everybody into their own city. It's just not everyone going to the same city, as an example. So, that was one of the feedback points I know that GMs gave the league this week, is that part of the driving reason was just thought in the modern world, you could decentralize it would save us money. Well, it's not even really saving people money. So, that's why I do think it's going to go back, unless, who knows, maybe this is such a hit when we see it and everyone loves it and it's successful. Maybe they'll keep on with it. But, Gary Bettman, to his credit, he kept saying this is what the teams wanted. Like, this wasn't driven by the head office of the league. That they didn't make this switch. They just sort of listened to the feedback they were getting. And it's like, you already want to switch back before you've seen how it looks.
Exactly. Speaking of feedback, Gary Bettman was asked about the possibility of changing the playoff format. I hear he was very receptive, CJ.
He said we're already in our play-in right now. He's like, the races are so great that this is the play-in for the playoffs right now, which I thought was a nice way to spit on it. But look, he had fun with the answer because he basically said, "You guys know where I stand on this. Like I'm dug in. I'm not changing my mind." And it's really the beginning of the end of the conversation. Like, you and I can have this conversation about what we think it should be, but this is not a conversation happening at the top of the league, because Gary Bettman, who obviously has the biggest voice in the room when it comes to these kind of decisions, he doesn't want to see it change. So unless or until that happens, or maybe if there's a new commissioner at some point down the line who wants to view it differently, I don't see it being changed. And, the one thing I will agree with him on is I still think the Stanley Cup playoffs are incredibly exciting. And especially the first round, it just somehow happens. You play that last set of regular season games and 2 or 3 days pass and the playoffs start, and it's just like a different brand of hockey. It's everyone's shot out of a cannon. Now, as it goes along, it's such a physically and mentally demanding exercise to play through 2 months of that. The quality tends to drop off, I think, a little bit. But that being said, the NHL probably has at least a case for, the most exciting playoffs in sports, in North American sports. So, if you're going to stand on that, I can see why Bettman has his views on not changing the format. But, I will reiterate my own position, is I'd like to see it be something more like a 1-8 conference format. But the downsides of a 1-8 conference format is you're probably going to have more teams, especially in the Western Conference. This is relevant. You're going to have more teams that aren't in the same time zone playing each other, which does, create some scheduling issues for fans. If you had a team in Pacific time playing one in Central time, but some games will be starting late for one of the markets involved in that kind of thing. So there's pros and cons to each option, but Gary was in a fun mood at the wrap of those meetings yesterday, because he shot that one down, and then our colleague Pierre LeBrun asked him, "Hey, did you give the GM update on your feet?" And he's like, "Absolutely not." And he's like, "You keep trying to get rid of me. I'm going to ask you in this business." So,
Jeez, Ryan. Is this? I will give Gary Bettman this. I feel like we're giving him too much credit. I will give him this, though. I admire him wanting to fully lean into some kind of heel turn, or just be like, "Oh no, I'm the big bad boss." Everyone needs a villain in these sports. I understand it. I will give him that.
Do you think the divisional format should be changed? Like, do you personally think that?
So I'm cool with a 1 through 8. I've said that before, but here's one thing I would like to see. If you're going to keep the divisional format as it is right now, here's something I would like to see. You add the play-in with the wildcard teams. Hear me out for a second. And I know this is kind of similar to what's going on in the NBA anyway, but right now, if you look at the Eastern Conference, and I'm only going off points, I just have the standings here. I don't think I have, I'm going on the score app, so they don't have points percentage. But the Senators are in a wild card spot, the Canadiens are in a wild card spot, and then you have the Rangers and the Islanders below them. Wouldn't it be cool if at the end of the regular season, those 4 teams went against each other in a play-in style? You have 1 through 4, 2 versus 3. The winners of that come out and play against each other. Well, I guess those two could essentially be those 2 teams. But like, you have 1 through 4, just that as a play-in to decide who gets those final 2 spots in each conference. Like, if you're gonna have it that set like that, and people love play-ins in other sports, like, why not add that element? I don't think that would be. That could even be an extra game of revenue for those home teams. You could make it those top 2 teams already in wildcard spots for those play-ins. And maybe if you're those teams, you're pushing back, being like, well, hey, we did all the work to be in those spots. But if you're trying to add a little bit more excitement for your regular season, why not do that?
Right. And then you would have more teams like the Bruins, for example, just look at today's standings, all the way down to them would still be in the mix to at least get to, the play-in game. So you're
100%.
kind of you're expanding the pool of teams that have a reasonable chance to at least find their way into the playoffs. I think 100%. The only downside of that is you don't want the layoff between the end of the season and the start of the full playoffs to be too long, because teams aren't going to like that, right? I mean, there's probably an element where you don't mind a couple days of rest to practice and get ready, but you would have to execute the wild card games pretty quickly. I think that's probably a requirement to make that thing work. And honestly, I have to believe we're going to go to some format like this eventually, just because of the money aspect you mentioned. The fact that, it's not a front burner issue today, expansion, but I do think we're going to live in a world where we see the NHL expand somewhere on the horizon in the nearish future. And so the more, you keep adding teams, you're going to have to expand how many can qualify for the playoffs. So this will be after Gary Bettman's tenure as commissioner, because he's not changing his mind. But I do think, look, over a period of time, the NHL playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs have changed a ton. Like, there's been a lot of different formats over the years. They even briefly did a 1 through 16 format for the playoffs, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. So you could have you could have Anaheim play Boston in round 1 or whatever. Think of long travel series. So anyway, if you look at the history, this thing has changed and evolved. I think the future will change and evolve again.
Did Bettman go in on any other potential rule changes or discussions of that nature?
No, I think that maybe the most interesting other point is that he said that collective bargaining talks are formally scheduled to begin, that they've scheduled with the NHLPA to meet the first week of April. And the most sweet thing he said, he hopes they go quickly, he hopes they go quietly, and they hopes they go painlessly. So the fact that you have, having been around for a long time, I covered on a daily basis the 2012-13 lockout, which was half a season. Obviously, I have memories, as you probably do, of the 04-05 lockout, which canceled the entire season. If you're old enough, you remember a lockout in 94, 95. Like, this sport has lost a lot of games over the years to those work stoppages. The fact that they're starting talks officially in April 2025 for an agreement that doesn't expire till September 2026, that there's so much optimism in the air, that they've already set where the salary cap is projected to go the next 3 seasons, and it's projected to go, healthily and it's up, meaning that they're projecting a lot more revenue coming into the business. It seems like everything's in place for this to kind of happen quietly. And then one day, I don't know if it'll be the Stanley Cup final or where it'll be, they're just going to come out and say they've got an extension done. That's the sweetest news of all. I don't think we need to spend every podcast going through every issue and all the minutia and back and forth, covering that lockout. It was actually kind of interesting from a work perspective, but it's ugly, right? It's ugly business. And when a league shuts down, a lot of people are impacted financially. People that work for the league tend to get not paid their full salary. Obviously, people that work in arenas or work for teams, they're in that position. It's not good for anybody. And it's basically billionaires and millionaires fighting over money. It's a hard thing for the average fan to really kind of put their mind around, right? So it seems to me that the most interesting takeaway that they're having those talks starting in the first week of April is that I think there's a path here just to get this done some point in the next few months and not have it even really be a public discussion point.
Okay. I want to get to a story that you and Michael Russo put together earlier this week on Tom Fitzgerald, the New Jersey Devils general manager, imploring for cut-resistant equipment to be more of a thing in the NHL after an unfortunate incident that took place with his son in the AHL recently.
Yeah, his son Casey was playing a game December 28th, and he actually was wearing a neck protection, and an opponent's skate kind of went up and clipped him, and he had a pretty scary cut on the side of his neck. And, they actually, what was interesting, look, this issue is obviously in the death of Aaron Johnson last year, or Adam Johnson, pardon me. It's been a pretty focus, something that's been focused upon. The AHL and the ECHL mandate cut-resistant equipment now. Leagues internationally do that. Junior leagues. Really, it's the NHL is one of the last places where it's not a requirement. I do think, again, that to me, it's a matter of when, not if, it will be a requirement at some point in the NHL. But I think sometimes maybe you need some of these personal stories, these personal anecdotes to connect with it, right? I mean, Tom was pretty emotional in speaking to his colleagues essentially about this. He's actually part of the committee that's been put together to oversee cut resistant equipment on behalf of GM. So he's, that's just a weird coincidence, I suppose you might say, but they showed the video in the room of the play where Casey got cut. They showed still photos of basically the before and after of that injury, pretty graphic photos, pretty scary, especially when you see like there's nothing malicious that happens. Like the game is fast. Obviously the skates are very sharp and it doesn't take much when you see where he was cut to imagine that he could have had something very serious happen, with the veins in his neck. So, he basically put a human side to it. Basically said he thinks that if the way to get through players, because let's face it, players are younger, might not be thinking of the future the same way, but have them try to connect with them. Like, how would your parents feel if this was you, essentially kind of thing. And lo and behold, later that night, a game you were at in Montreal, Josh Anderson, I don't think it's related to what Tom Fitzgerald was telling the GMs down in Florida. I think it's more because Caden Gooley had a pretty bad skate cut injury earlier this year, his teammate. But Josh Anderson, for the very first time, puts on Kevlar socks to keep from being cut. And lo and behold, in that game, Shane Pinto's skate comes up accidentally, goes right across what would have been in his Achilles, and there's no damage done. In fact, Josh Anderson stays in the game, scores 2 goals, and he's the first star of the night. But it's not hard to imagine a world where he's not wearing those Kevlar socks, where that could have resulted in some kind of really poor, bad outcome for him. And so, I think we're getting there with a lot of players. I mean, Josh Anderson's an example of a veteran player in the league, played a lot of games. And the fact he's putting that kind of equipment on is encouraging. But there's just too much at stake. I mean, there's near misses all the time in games. That's another thing the league's hockey operations department does. They sort of keep, when they see, they track every game, obviously. When they see those near misses, they compile them and they show them at the GM's meeting, just to underline the point. Fortunately, knock wood, we haven't had, anything like a death on the ice like they did in Britain last season. But there's all these near misses, and we just know that the dangers at play here. So that was a long answer to your question, but I do think that we're going to get to a point. I mean, I know too now there's actually in development, people are working on a cut resistant, basically chin strap, something that goes, around your neck on the helmet. So it's not just a traditional neck protector. And so we're going to see, I think, innovations as well in the type of equipment that's available to players. And so you combine that with the fact everybody coming up through the AHL is already wearing this stuff. I do think it's only a matter of time before the NHLPA and the NHL grandfather it in and require every new player in the league to wear it the way they did with visors. And now we're at a stage where there's only, I think, a couple players in the whole league that don't wear a visor. I think that's where we'll be at in 10 years with cut resistant equipment.
I'm with you with that. I don't know about you, but ever since that unfortunate incident with Adam Johnson last year, I've become a lot more observant about skates coming up either a near miss to the face or neck or anything like that. Like I've just all of a sudden now those things become a lot more apparent. And not that these things didn't happen before, but it's just that situation opened up so many eyes around the league. So I'm all for all that cut resistant technology just becoming more and more of a thing just out of the safety of those players.
Yeah, the one that got it for me was Ilya Mikheyev years ago was playing for the Leafs at a game in New Jersey, and he got his wrist cut. And it was just, again, such an innocent play. And the way, I wasn't at that game, but the way the cameras caught him, you could see like the fear in his eyes, and basically a blood trail went off the ice. He spent, I think, 3 days, if I recall correctly, in hospital. It was the game right after Christmas. Kyle Dubas, who was Leafs GM at the time, actually stayed in New Jersey with, Mikheyev and made sure, he had everything he needed at the hospital. But it was such an innocent play is what got me. Like, we're used to sometimes, in our sport, people cross the line, there's injuries, whatever. But it just kind of underlined like how dangerous this could be. You see so many players with exposed either wrists or, the Achilles injuries are always possible. And obviously the neck is the extreme version of what can happen. But, yeah, I mean, I think it is front of mind for a lot of players. I mean, we've seen pretty big changes already. I just think there's a little ways to go.
Absolutely. Is there anything else we need to bring up from these meetings this week that I didn't ask you?
No, I would say this. It was probably, I've covered a lot of GM's meetings over the years. It was maybe the least newsy. I mean, whenever Gary Bettman speaks and he's covering the range of topics he did, there's news out of that. But in terms of like rule changes or tweaks, there isn't. There was nothing that got to that level. And that's kind of unusual. Usually sometimes it's very minute parts of rules. I'm not saying these are like massive changes in the game, but there's usually coming out of these meetings, something like that. And it wasn't the case this week. It was interesting. They spent so much time looking at the goaltender interference plays. I think just because, let's face it, reviews are up this year. The league has seen, that's one thing they did share with us, that it's the most number of reviews, we're trending towards having, when it comes to challenging goals for offsides or for goaltender interference, other plays. And, as we get to these games where every goal matters so much, we get into the playoffs where every goal matters so much. I think the league is, not wanting to, I don't want to say living in fear, but they're aware that there's a possibility for some controversy, for some debate, for them having to make a ruling that both teams aren't going to be happy with. It's the nature of the job. So that the fact they spent so much time on goaltender reviews with the GMs, I think let's just put that in the back of our minds for whatever happens on May 12th or when we get into a big game and there'll be some kind of play, I think, because that's why they do it, right? Like they're setting the stage for, okay, we showed you all like these, they're basically going through their standard. They showed you all these different plays. They showed 55 clips, Julian, 54 clips. They had every GM vote whether the right call was made. Only one of the 54 clips was unanimous, 32-0. So 53 other clips, you can put it where the majority might have said that they got the call right, but there were still some people who thought they didn't get the call right. So that underlines that. I mean, obviously it's a subjective call, but it does underline that you can't please everyone if you're going to have goaltender interference reviews. It's not as simple as right or wrong, black or white, however you want to frame that. And so, I'm just merely putting this out there. I'm not trying to conjure anything bad, but we could have another Game 7 of the Cup final. We could have, certainly we'll have Game 7s in other rounds. You could have a goal in overtime. All those sorts of things could be coming in the future here. And so I think they wanted to underline, here's what the standard is. And now we'll go argue about it in 6 weeks' time.
And
everyone's happy in Florida in March, but then not so happy in May when it affects their team.
Absolutely. And then you have a Lindy Ruff-esque moment where you have some GM or coach go up on stage, be like, no goal, and enjoy your summer. I would love for that to happen.
Is that what Lindy said in 99?
That's what he said in 99. He was like, I got 2 words before we leave for the summer. No goal. And then he left.
It's hilarious. I don't remember that.
I've seen that video on TSN like a bunch of times.
Yeah, I mean, I believe you and it makes sense. It's just, I don't remember any of I remember the moment, of course, the Brett Hall goal is a pretty famous moment. It sparked a rule change immediately because the foot in the crease rule at the time was getting ridiculous. But I didn't remember Lindy's reaction.
I'll send you the video over in the CJ Show chat. Anyway, it's time for stick taps. Should I start? Do you want to start?
You should start. I thought you were going to deliver a cross check today. You seemed a little feisty. So
here's the thing. I have a cross check and I have a stick tap. I really want to do the cross check, but part of me thinks, you know what? Maybe I could save that just for the socials. I mean, there's a particular story that I know I've already retweeted on my X profile that I'm very passionate about. Maybe I could just leave it for that because I want to end on a good mood.
Gotcha.
I want to leave on a good mood here. I will give my stick tap to Steve Dangle because I don't know if you heard over the weekend. You probably saw watching the Sens Leafs game with the weird goalie gaff that Linus Ullmark had. Just mishandling the puck. The puck kind of hopped on him a little bit weird. And then Austin Matthews scores his 24th of the year. And when he was asked to address it, he said a whole bunch of different stuff. And at the end, he said, if you're a goalie, tend the goal. That is a quote that we've heard so much from one Steve Dangle. And I will give him the stick tap for that quote being added formally to the lexicon of NHL players. That just goes to show the power of one man in a blue room wearing a Leafs jersey and the impact he can have on thousands, if not millions, of hockey people across the world.
We need you.
I'll give him that.
We need you to ask Linus at some point if you get a free moment and he's just in the dressing room. Like, is he aware that Steve said that? Like, did he know it's from Steve? Does he know who Steve is? Or is it just a coincidence he's heard this thing and repeated it?
I will ask. I will find a moment and I will ask Linus about that because that is... When I heard that, I was like, holy shit, like he said that. So yeah, that's my stick tap.
Yeah. I don't really have one today. I'll get my homework.
I don't know if I need to go in on my cross check to make up for the fact you don't have a stick tap. It's all good. Anyway. We could share my stick tap for Steve if you want.
I'll stick tap the playoff races. It's actually getting pretty interesting. And it's kind of cool we're at the stage where every night the games, you look at the scoreboard because there's impacts there and the playoff races really aren't like who's going to play who outside of looks like Dallas and Colorado is pretty much locked in. But there's still a fair bit of, potential movement there, which I think makes everything more interesting. And obviously I'm trying to plan. And as I'm sure you're thinking, what's the spring going to look like? And we're not going to get an answer probably yet for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've had to, actually not even a while because when the Canadians were in the playoffs in 2021, that season I wasn't traveling, but this would be the first time I get to properly cover a playoff series if the Senators officially do the job and make it into the playoffs. This is actually pretty exciting. Holy shit.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
You know what's crazy? Yeah. As of right now, there's 6 Canadian teams in the playoff window, and there's a version where 7 could make it. Now, it's unlikely in a sense because Vancouver and Calgary are kind of fighting for the same spot, so it's probably an either or if that's what happens. And obviously, St. Louis is in the mix. There's other teams that could knock both of them out potentially, but as of this moment, there's 6 Canadian teams in the playoffs, which is wild. Like, I remember that year 2015-16. When I was working at Sportsnet, we were obviously the national rights holder for NHL games, and there was no Canadian teams. So it was kind of a strange time. But this is could be a good year in the country you and I both live in for fans of the teams.
Absolutely. Get your questions in now for Ask CJ. We'll get to them on the Monday edition of the CJ Show. CJ, great work as always. Safe travels back from Florida, back to Canada, obviously. And we'll talk to you all next week.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.